It is Friday, October 20th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another venomous episode of LTPS. It is Spider-Man 2 launch day. We are finally here. The game is out. It reviewed quite well. Congrats to Insomniac for finally shipping the game. It's out there, so if you're playing it, hope you enjoy it. Have a great weekend. Also, Mario Wonder came out as well, so I'm really excited for that, and Spider-Man 2. A lot of straight bangers that are now finally out there, right? So a lot of fun to be had, but we are here, of course, to talk about some PlayStation news. So first, as always, a very brief reminder for the PS Plus lineup. The essential games for October still live on PSN. Also, PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium. Those games are now live on PSN as well, which also means there's now a new lineup of titles that are going to be leaving in about a month. So November 21st, only 7 games are leaving, so nothing crazy, but if you're looking at these titles, you've been wanting to play them, then you're going to want to get that time in. I would say My Time at Porsche is the one that might be worth checking out, but, there's still a handful of pretty interesting things in there. Ace of Seafood, Wild Guns Reloaded, so you've got about a month left to play those games. But moving on to our first news story, let's talk about Spider-Man 2 because it is finally out now, and so we can discuss the reviews that came out on Monday, and this is where we can again give a huge congratulations to Insomniac because this game was received very well. They're sitting at a 91 on Metacritic across 130 different reviews, which, as we've said before, nowadays it's very tough to break that 90 barrier on these aggregate sites like Metacritic, where you've got nearly 100 plus outlets that are, usually reviewing a lot of the big titles that come out nowadays. So it's not like what it was 10, 15 years ago where, a handful of sites were really the ones that were getting thrown into this overall average. So assuming a game was good, obviously, there was just a much better shot that it would, be in the upper 80s to 90 plus. That's why there's so many games that rank that high that are a lot older nowadays. But, I digress. It's just that being in the 80s is always good, but it's really impressive for Insomniac. Now, across a lot of the different reviews, obviously we're not going to get too in-depth on the actual game. We're not going to really talk about spoilers or things that I think people would consider, just interesting enough that they want to experience on their own. But there has been some, reoccurring themes and the general consensus around the experience so far in terms of drawbacks is that it seems like the pacing of the story is a little bit off or misplaced, and that it certainly does feel a bit samey with the combat and the environments, which that was certainly expected going into this well before there was we even had substantial trailers for the game, because at this point there's always been that sort of notion of okay, it's Manhattan again. We had it in Spider-Man the first one, we had it in Miles Morales, now it's here again, even though we're getting 2 more boroughs. So there is certainly going to be that fatigue, but it depends on your tolerance with that, or just how excited you are to be back in that universe and things like that. But regardless of those things, it seems like they've crafted a beautiful game here that I cannot wait to spend more time with. Now, since we are more or less on this ongoing parade of congratulating Insomniac, let me just also applaud them for what they also did recently, which was post on X about how the game is, the Gold Master that's on the disc is very playable. It's a complete build from start to finish, but they do still recommend that you should download that day 1 patch. So it's awesome to see them actually acknowledge this. So they did put out this post here where they say the disc contains the entire game, playable again from start to finish with no online requirement, but there is a day 1 patch that includes additional polish to the game's opening sections, general refinements, and then additional accessibility options. So for those curious as to what that day 1 patch includes, that is what is in there. So I just really appreciate Insomniac's transparency on a topic like this, where I wish more studios would outline, or have this goal internally of, we want to print a really solid Gold Master that you can play immediately without online, and also hey, if there is a day 1 patch, here's what's in it, here's what it's doing, we recommend that you grab it, but you don't necessarily need it either. So another example of Insomniac dropping the crown. Here you go, King, you drop this. It's really something else. And on a similar topic for our next news story, in terms of additional post-launch support and what the game does not have right now, I believe this was already confirmed before, but just to reconfirm it, Insomniac's James Stevenson did outline this on X, where he said that in terms of New Game Plus or Mission Replay, it's not there on day 1, but that will come later as an additional update, which, this is again something where Insomniac has been very good about post-launch support, adding not only additional goodies or modes or things like that, but also just supporting it and cleaning the game up and polishing it more and more. And I would expect that they're probably going to keep doing that for this game. Now, one final thing about Spider-Man 2. This was really funny to see how this played out, which was during the review cycle, one thing that went viral was the loading times for the game, or the lack thereof, because as we've seen with Insomniac during the entire PS5 cycle, they've been this premier, leading developer on the platform, showcasing what PlayStation 5 and the SSD can do, and so for Spider-Man 2, the game can fast travel, in like less than 2 seconds. Not even so much a proximity thing where based on where you're fast traveling to, that's where it gets really fast. It seems like no matter where you are on that map, it can be about less than 2 seconds, which is incredible. So that's been going viral. But there is a hold to confirm prompt, and that lasts about 4 to 5 seconds. And naturally, some are making the accusation that it's there to hide the loading, which would make it about a 5 to 6 second load in reality. But what's so funny about this is that Mike Fitzgerald, Insomniac's director of core technologies, confirmed on Reset Era that not only is that prompt not there for loading, but he as recently as last month even pitched internally the idea to remove it because of this very accusation he thought would happen. However, hold to confirm prompts are there because they're meant to reject mistaken inputs. So for player usability, they opted not to remove it. So Mike ends off his post by saying that player experience is more important than the internet cred points, even though they love those cred points. I read that and I couldn't help but laugh. It's so funny how internally at Insomniac, especially for their technical team with the engineers and programmers and everybody responsible for making this game look and play the way that it does, they're so proud of what they've accomplished, and they really do want to push boundaries here, and that's what they've been doing on this hardware. And so it's so funny to see Mike here talk about this and even say, like, I knew people were going to bring this up. It's not there for that. I even wanted to get rid of it, but somebody had to step in and be like, Mike, we do that because it's a quality of life thing, which I do find it a bit funny that most folks, I wouldn't say most, but there was that accusation to begin with, because a lot of modern games nowadays do this. It's not to, help a game, like give a game an additional 4 to 5 seconds. It's there for a number of, again, to reject mistaken inputs, right? It could be for a dialogue option you're about to make. It could be for equipping a bunch of changes in a menu and then making sure that you want to save those changes. I mean, there's a number of examples. People know this is a thing that is very commonplace nowadays. And so Mike even going there on Reset Era and putting it out there that, hey, I wanted to get rid of it, but we really can do this game in a second because that's what our team put together, and we're, again, you got to know that they're quite proud of that. Anyway, moving on to our next news story, PS5 just got a brand new feature that you probably already have because you did not have to download a firmware update for this. It was a server-side change, so as long as you're online, then you probably already have this, which is being able to manually check for patches in your game library, which previously you could only do that for titles that are on your main row on your home screen. So if you hit options, you can check for an update, and that's something where you can manually push a download. But now you can do it in the game library. You could not do that before. It's one of those things where people just noticed this on Reddit, and so it's a new feature that recently went live. And very handy. It's something where I've seen a lot of people ask, why does the console do that sometimes? Where even if you do put it in rest mode and you want to have the automatic patches and downloads get pushed, there's still times where you will go into your game library, launch a title, and then you notice that a download started. There's a patch for this game, and you're wondering why it didn't grab that before. But it's more a matter of how the system manages when it's going to actually do that for you. It typically only does it based on a set amount of time. We don't necessarily know how recent it has to be, but essentially, the console is managing your software in terms of what you're actively playing and engaging with. So if there's something you've not played in a long time, the console is not going to look for a download or a patch for that title. So that's normally why it does that. And so now you can manually check and push those updates if you want to. There's still no one button that makes it happen for all your games, but it's something where you can finally do it for individual titles in the game library that are locally stored. So not a groundbreaking feature, but something where probably should have been there a long time ago, and now we finally have it. I really wish we could still get being able to check update history for PS5 titles. You can do it for PS4, but still not for PlayStation 5, something where I would like to have that come back. Now, moving on to that new PlayStation 5 model that we know is coming sometime next month. We just don't know when exactly because Sony didn't say, just that November, and then it will roll out globally in the following months. But now, based on a new report from Bilbo Kuhn for Deal Labs, the same source that's always leaking PS Plus games, and they're almost always right, and then corroborated by Insider Gaming, we've got a release date for the new PS5 model. So they claim November 8th in the US and Japan is when there will be a Spider-Man bundle with the new console priced at $559.99 USD, and then 2 days later, November 10th, that is when standard models should be available at retail, and you have to figure around that time or fairly soon we'll see the consoles go up on PlayStation Direct as well. Now, Insider Gaming also claims that Sony has an estimated 4.5 million units of the new console ready to sell, and as far as sales estimates go, which they've reported on before, previously they mentioned Sony was estimating 18 million Slim models would be sold for fiscal year 23, which would go into the beginning of April next year, but apparently this has been reduced to 14 million due to a delay where they initially wanted to, they wanted to release this console by September. That was always Insider Gaming's report, and that's why this entire time, the leak was around that time, so it was like, oh, okay, we should be seeing it fairly soon, and then it was kind of MIA, so it's like, oh, okay, maybe Q1 next year, or maybe they're planning on shipping it closer to PlayStation 5 Pro, but no, it really was a matter of them always wanting to, release it around that time, 3 years after. It's always around September, October, so, sometimes PlayStation is still very formulaic in what they've historically done, so this was not much different, but based on sales estimates, that means that, yeah, they likely did run into some sort of little hiccup with manufacturing or something, right, and so that's why we didn't see the console release when we were expecting it to, but having said that, if you're in the market for a new PS5, and there's really no reason to upgrade because there's no on-paper hardware bump, spec bump that we're seeing here. It's the same deal for any sort of mainline home console that Sony slims down. You don't really, you don't need to buy a new one, but if you're in the market for one, then you might as well wait because you'll have some options very soon with, again, a Spider-Man 2 bundle or just standard consoles at retail. Moving on to some trophy news, which I feel like we don't get to talk about that too often, but we've got more and more mounting evidence of PlayStation probably supporting trophies for their PC games, based on a recent discovery from True Trophies, which is a site that will scan PSN backend data, and that's how they'll normally find trophy lists appearing on PSN, and they'll publish that stuff, and sometimes we get leaks that way, and so what happened here was they found a new game on PSN. It's, again, backend data, you can't see this normally, but it's called Trophy Set, which is probably not a real game, but more of a placeholder for a test environment. And the interesting thing here is the platforms listed is PS5 and PSPC, which that itself is also interesting because they're listed under one game. I should use air quotes there, one game, because it's not really a game. But the fact that the tags are on one game also implies that not only is the feature coming, but it might also let us know that Sony is planning on doing unified trophy lists again across PS5 and PC, as we saw with PS3, Vita, and PS4. Back in the day, that was something that developers could do. That was more discretionary on their part, right? Sometimes they could do a unified list across all those platforms or whatever they were shipping on, or sometimes they would just opt to do different lists. And that's always, at least for like trophy hunters and wanting to sell more copies of a game if you don't do cross-buy, like it was always advantageous to just do separate versions, and that's why people love how that's not possible on PS5. You cannot share a trophy list across PS4 and PS5, so you can always double dip, as they say, and if there's cross-save progression, then you can auto-pop on PS5. But we're getting into the weeds here. The point is, this is clearly telling us that they're probably gearing up to finally do this. Looking back at their prior PC releases where those were data mined, we already saw initially that they were going to do PSN login within the game, which eventually, some titles do that now. But with Sony's still growing PC segment and, internally building out this new PC division, there's only going to be more here. I mean, this is going to be kind of an unnatural step. I think eventually we were finally going to get this, and probably a PC client proper where you can, have that installed on desktop, maybe also Steam Deck, since they do want to do a lot of Steam Deck verification, but maybe have kind of this all-in-one package that not only allows you to log into PSN, properly supporting trophies, and if they're going to do unified lists, then for some games offer that cross progression and make it seamless, make it via the cloud, and there's so many ways they can do this, and consolidating features overall, right? Because there's separate clients for PS Plus cloud streaming or remote play, so really I think there's a lot here that they can do, and if we do get trophies on PC titles and they continue with Steam Deck verification and this cross progression, I mean, in a weird way, that's how we can get a sort of indirect, locally played portable PlayStation, right? Not the PlayStation Portal where it has to be streamed off a PS5, but I mean, Steam Deck is still a very viable platform that has good performance. I mean, there's so many portable PC players coming into the segment now, so really it's something where I think there's a lot of good options here, so I would like to see this eventually happen. I would definitely be interested in playing on PC occasionally if there is going to be some trophy support. Next up, we have a very interesting patent filed by Sony Interactive Entertainment, and it's for a controller that could, in theory, dock headphones, and then you can charge them that way, and then you also always have a place to store them, and so you could perhaps pop them out, put them back in your ears, play, right, put them back in and charge, and so yeah, it seems really cool. This patent was shared around a lot this past week. It's called Integrated Headset Controller Storage and Connection. It was filed back in April 2022, recently published October 12th of this year, and yeah, the patent does say this is what they want to do as a way to lighten the burden for players who have to deal with what Sony calls so many input and output devices. Since, a patent, they always have to outline the problem solving that they're looking to do and why this is, some kind of new idea that they have to protect. As we've said many times over with patents, it's something where they regularly file patents, a lot of them, right? It's a ridiculous amount, and oftentimes a lot of them we don't actually see get shipped in a commercial product that's available to consumers. But this is one of those things where not only does it sound, I think, like a great idea, although in terms of the logistics and the engineering behind it, I feel like it would be a challenge to accomplish that with how little space there is inside the controller. So not really sure if this is something where it would be, a controller they'd sell separately. Maybe it would be the new standard controller for, PlayStation 6. I mean, that is something we can sort of have fun speculating on, is that, Sony is absolutely in the midst of, shaping what PlayStation 6 is going to look like, and that would be, I would consider, a next-gen thing for sure. Not saying it's going to happen, but, we can certainly get a little playful with that discussion right now, is that what is PlayStation 6 really going to look like? And something like this, I would say, is, that would be one avenue to go down. Moving on to our next news story, we've got some bad news, but it's bad news for a very different reason, which is the PlayStation Store on PS3 and Vita is closing down in Croatia on November 9th, and only Croatia because of what is a very unique circumstance. So for those that are out of the loop on this, when Croatia joined the EU, they were supposed to change their currency over on January 1st of this year, which they did, but PlayStation did not have their systems in order to change over right away for the PlayStation Store. So for most of 2023, Sony suspended card payments in the country, and they were instead encouraging users to use PSN cards, and this also meant that Sony was extending PS Plus memberships on a free monthly basis if somebody had a subscription already, and that was supposed to extend during the downtime. So they've actually been extending these for free. But anyway, it wasn't until recently that PlayStation Croatia finally announced that card payments would be coming back. And that's good news at first glance, but tucked away in the FAQ for the currency change, they announced that November 9th is the last day to make purchases for the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita stores. They're getting shut down, likely because of this, as in the only reason why they're shutting down is because clearly they're very outdated storefronts, and so the sort of back-end management and engineering that goes into, changing over currencies, which was probably a unforeseen circumstance when the stores were originally made, and obviously they're not active platforms. So if PS3 and Vita were the current active systems, they would of course put in the money to change it over. But given the scenario of them being legacy platforms and this happening, which is not exactly something that happens often, a country changing currency, that's why they're just straight up shutting them down. And so that's why it's also unrelated to Sony wanting to shut down the stores, as we saw from 2021. So I found this fascinating because it very much is a really unfortunate circumstance. They're legacy platforms, and this does not exactly happen every day. So one of the few times where I'm like, wow, that really sucks. But yeah, I can see why that would be the result, you know. So for those in Croatia, yeah, it sucks having that cutoff, right, for PS3 and Vita from that particular storefront. Obviously, if somebody lives somewhere, they can always sign up to a different storefront and access it that way. That's always been possible. You just have to fund the account properly with funds from that region. So, but either way, it's still disappointing, and it does still bring up the question of when are we going to see the stores shut down for good? It will happen at some point. We are living in this indefinite time period of, you know, we can enjoy it while it lasts, but it's not going to stay up for much longer, I would have to imagine. So false alarm for now, but that was something where I found it pretty interesting that this was definitely an unforeseen situation. Next up, we have some more news on the physical video game market, which, real quick, as an update on last week's story about Best Buy, how they were potentially going to drop physical media, and we did not know if that included video games. Well, that story was outdated very quickly, because if you did not see the pinned comment on that video, then Best Buy did confirm that they are going to drop DVDs, Blu-ray, 4K UHD for movies and TV, but they are not going to stop selling physical video games. So for the time being, we're in the clear. Best Buy is not going to exit the business anytime soon, but they are indeed dropping physical movies, which is still not exactly great news, but for now you can keep buying physical games there. On the flip side, though, we do have some good news, which is when the acquisition for Activision Blizzard was finalized, and that was a whole big story that came out. Microsoft making a blog post and promotional videos announcing everything and doing interviews. Obviously, that was going to happen on Friday, so at least we were able to acknowledge it at the time, since it seemed like it was going to close on Friday. But anyway, Ubisoft also published a blog post on their site, discussing the news of the closure and how they have streaming rights on Ubisoft Plus, and, talking about what that means. But they also commented on their position with physical video game sales. And so Chris Early, Ubisoft's SVP, Strategic Partnerships and Business Development, gave a very encouraging answer on its future. He says, and I quote, "There's a collector's edition market. There's the aspect of gifting physical items and allowing access for people to be able to easily purchase a game in a store and gift them to their friends or family. Some people will always want to own the physical disc. I just don't think it's going to go away. Do I think physical sales might get lower over time? Sure, but will it ever completely go away? I don't think so." So that is really great news. That shows that a big publisher, Ubisoft, one of the last remaining few on the heels of this ABK news, but a large independent AAA publisher, for now, vowing that they are still going to ship physical discs for, you would presume, a lot of their games, most of their games. So that was actually really enlightening and great to see, right? So again, it's weird. Obviously we are in a landscape of us going more and more digital, but in a strange way, there's still this resurgence and availability that is there, right? I mean, it's that sort of, I guess, not tipping point, but that bottoming out point where will physical media completely sort of like fall flat and not really rebound, or will it rebound as we are seeing with other physical markets like CDs and vinyl, right? There has been a sort of uptick in those markets where they did bottom out eventually, and now there is sort of I guess a niche it would be considered, but based on the amount of money those markets still generate, while they're not the behemoths they once were, they're still relevant in some capacity. And so it kind of falls back to, if as long as the console manufacturers keep doing it, then in theory we should still be getting them. Now, going back to the Microsoft ABK news, with the transaction finally complete, we can cover up some additional news items here that we were not able to talk about last week, and we'll just rattle these off real quick, which would be number one, Bobby Kotick. He is leaving the end of this year, which, kind of good news, but also that's how this whole thing began. So he's kind of getting what he wants, which is leaving and getting a huge payoff, more or less, because remember, this goes back to them, him having a lot of misconduct stories, and then that's when Microsoft approached ABK and said, well, how about we work out a deal? And so that's how this whole thing happened. And so he's kind of getting what he wants, but he is leaving. Number two, Microsoft did use a lot of language recently implying that they do very much still intend on, treating ABK with, more or less shipping on all platforms, that they want to release on PlayStation, and it seems like that goes for all IP, but as we've discussed, and we have to remember always about this, the only on-paper contractual agreement is for Call of Duty for 10 years on PlayStation. So when it comes to other IP, we still don't know, but the language being used right now does imply that they do want to continue shipping on PlayStation for all properties that would, in theory, make sense. And then in terms of, I guess, Phil's immediate approach to the entire thing, right? So already, cementing the idea that there's going to be content parity across all their games. And, for Call of Duty, that means the beta launches on all platforms immediately, which is not a bad thing, obviously. These are all good things. So it's like I said before, there's a lot of short-term good things about the transaction. I do still find that the net positive result would have probably better been served that Activision would stay independent, but either way, the short-term things we're seeing is a lot of the preaching from Phil about content parity, and also talking about how the studios can explore old IP if they want to, right? And so kind of giving them that autonomy that they otherwise probably wouldn't have had when they were independent. So we will certainly see how it pans out, but for right now, that is what is being discussed for ABK and their broad approach for trying to integrate them gradually over time. Now, of course, the other angle of this is, well, what about Sony? What about the industry? The transaction is done, so now it's like, what are we going to see from here, right? And so there was a really interesting piece on gamesindustry.biz from a number of studio owners or analysts that were weighing in on the transaction, if it's going to be good or bad, and this and that. And so there were a few interesting quotes in there I thought we'd share with you all, which the first one comes from Carol Severin of Media Research, where he says, and I quote here, "Sony has one of the most impressive content catalogs on Earth. Bringing it together in a subscription offering, for example, could pose a solid competitive answer to Xbox's cross-platform efforts. It will be increasingly difficult to compete with Microsoft on games only. The only response for Sony on the games-only side would be buying something really big like Take-Two, but that is unlikely." This next comment comes from the games research director at Ampere Analysis, Piers Harding Rolls, where he says, and I quote, "Sony surely is under pressure to react, even after the Bungie acquisition. I expect further investments and acquisitions for PlayStation, including a large one that would move the needle for them in a meaningful way." That comment right there is the exact sentiment I've been sharing on this show for quite a bit, which is very much Sony is going to be in a position where they might have to. You know what I mean? For years, we've always discussed how Sony normally does merger and acquisition. There was a very clear, defined criteria that they look for, and it has to be like a long-standing partner studio. The company culture has to make sense. Would they integrate nicely? Like, these are real things that they always used to, pursue and acquire a studio. But they've picked up all those obvious partners. They're obviously just standard studios that can ship 1 or 2 games on a regular basis, but when you've got external factors at play, like Microsoft picking up Bethesda and now Activision, more rumblings going on of Ubisoft possibly getting acquired, even though they say, that they don't want to, but we're in a consolidating landscape, or EA possibly being acquired by Disney. I mean, we're going to see more stuff, right? So there is ongoing disruption. And so while PlayStation, the business is strong, Sony is in a good position. PlayStation has never been stronger, but there's only so much you can do sitting there kind of just investing internally when you've got mega consolidation going on. At a certain point, you are going to have to move the needle in what Piers describes as a meaningful way. And so that's what I keep saying is that, I'm not going to speculate on who it would be. Like, obviously that first comment makes sense, like Take-Two, very unrealistic, but there is going to be that point where it's like, Sony's probably going to break that norm. They are going to make an uncharacteristic acquisition that is meant to sort of solidify their position in this business and keep them, stronger than ever, which that itself will be an interesting process when it eventually does happen, looking at what Microsoft had to go through. But I think it's bound to happen, so we'll keep waiting and see, but it's an interesting market that we're living in right now. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the former weekly giveaway where I was trying to give away $10 PSN codes. Still no update for you. I apologize, but I'm just not getting straight answers that would reliably let me put the link down there. So, and Linktree is something where that wouldn't even be like a guarantee either. We'll probably try it next week just to see how that goes. But YouTube can be very finicky in terms of their automation and trying to catch what might be considered deceptive. So it's really a guessing game, which is the frustrating part about it. But for now, that's all I have to share. Those are some of the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was looking at PlayStation 5 game streaming in Japan. The feature is now live over there, so we did kind of a first look, early impressions, which it's actually really good. Surprised me, so you can go check that out. The next launch is in Europe on the 23rd, which we're not going to look at. I'll wait until the North American launch, and then we'll do another video on that. But for now, at least, that is it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.